The next thing we want to talk about are blocks. We are going to attempt to draw all of these symbols in our drawing, and you'll notice that they are all very similar, and these are types of objects that would get reused from drawing to drawing. And so the way people typically handle these is through the creation of blocks, which is a collection of objects that can have properties and actually can have dynamic properties that are modifiable. And these would be collected in a library, and when you go to draw something for your company or for yourself, you'd pull these things from your library. If you go to Isidore, I've already created a drawing that has some of these common blocks in them, so you can save this to your computer. I've already got it somewhere, but I'm just going to put it on the desktop to show you guys. Then you can open it up, and if you look at these things, I've got an ID for a room, an ID for a door, an ID for a wall, and an ID for a window. Now the way I'm going to get these into my drawing is to copy and paste them, but first I want to show you where these would be. So if we go to Insert under the blocks here, you can see I don't really have any of these. The only one I have is actually a block from the dimension style there. So we could create our own, but a far easier way is to attain a library from the company you work for, or to collect these things and use them from another source. So we are going to repurpose these. So I'm going to select them, hit Control C, come back to my drawing and hit Control V, and you'll notice they are super tiny because what happened is I created these such that they were 1/8 of an inch when printed. So these are on the order of 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. But now if you look at the insert block option, we've got all of these options. So I'm going to delete these now that it included those blocks in my drawing, and I need to go about setting up my annotation scale. So these objects are scaled a bit differently. They're scaled using annotative object scaling as opposed to standard scaling. And what that means is that when you add an object, you can assign it multiple scale factors that correspond to annotative object scales. Now these would correlate directly to your viewport scale and make your life easy if you had to use this detail in multiple viewports. So to give you an example, I'm going to zoom in here to the break room. I'm going to go to Insert, Block, Insert, and I'm going to add an ID number here. It says you're currently creating this annotative object, set the scale you want to use. I'm going to leave it at 1:1 and show you what happens. So I'm going to put it in here, and it is really tiny. If we go look at this, this is room 104. So in the room ID properties here, we can set it to 104 and hit OK. Now if we zoom in, it says 104, and if we hover over them, they have that little architectural scale icon in the top right of the crosshairs. What we can do is click on an annotative object and go to the right-click menu option, and then go to Annotative Object Scales and add and delete scales. Another way to get to this is to go to Annotate and then Annotation Scaling. Here you can look at a scale list for your drawing. You can also use the Add Delete Scales and then Add Current Scales there. So what we can do is we can click on the object and go to the Add Delete Scales and add one that corresponds with our viewport, which is 1/4 inch equals a foot. And I'm actually going to delete the old one away and hit OK. And now you can see it scaled the thing up by a factor of 48, which is convenient because it's now the same size as our text. A far easier way to go about adding these things is to set your annotative object scale down here. And a way to do that is to make sure that your annotation scale is selected here. So I'm going to set mine to 1/4 inch equals a foot. And now what I can do is add additional scales as well. So Insert, I'm going to add a door ID, and that would be door 104 as well. And then we can add our room ID as well. Now this is one of those dynamic scales that I was telling you guys about. So if we click on it, you can see it's got more properties rather than just the location. It's actually got this circle which allows me to position it at 90-degree sections, and it's also got this extension line which allows me to make them bigger or smaller in terms of that length. So we can go about adding all of these walls, and when we've got one of them set up, we can go through and we can add more of these. So you can see I can use this tail and shrink it down. I can double click on it, it'll let me modify my properties, so this can be A1. And we can add all of these symbols to our drawing here. The thing you want to make sure is that your annotative objects show up in your viewport. So sometimes you don't want your annotative objects to have the same scale as your viewport. So let me just show you. Maybe these door IDs are a bit too big, so we can scale them by half of what they should be scaled. So we'll use 1/2 inch equals a foot. Delete the old one, and now it's a much smaller scale. But if we go to our layout, sometimes those things don't show up because they don't correspond to our viewport. So what we might want to do is make sure when we are in our viewport that we show all of our annotative objects here. So in order to make sure that these things are visible, what we want to do is double click inside of here and make sure that this is clicked, and that will show the annotative object scales at whatever the top scale is. It doesn't just limit the annotative objects to objects that have the same scale as your viewport. And now you can see that we've got our door ID that shows up at a smaller scale there. So that's how you would go through adding these different blocks, and these blocks can be useful because you can use them over and over again.